our last but not the least presenter, Leander. He's an architect and a designer, co-founded OMT Architects in Berlin, Germany. They are also established in Kenya, East Africa. Leander's company are creating innovative design solutions based on local practices and resources. In addition to the sustainable character of the designs, flexibility in use and implementation is a key contributor to the success of projects. So I will hand you over to Leander. He can tell us a little bit more about himself if he wants to squeeze it in his time. And he has 20 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Moses.
Thank you very much, Architect Amibola, and thank you all the other speakers as well. They made my life a bit easier because they already explained you quite a lot about building with timber. I'm an architect. We build with timber. I worked for a lot of big companies around the world, especially focused on sustainable building materials and creating sustainable buildings. But I found these companies are not going far enough, and especially they are not considering Africa. And that's why we then founded OMT Architects a couple of years back to jump into what we think is an important market, especially for sustainable construction. Now, I started my study in 1998. That was the year I think cross-laminated timber was first being noticed as a possible project or product. And I finished or graduated from university when the first mass timber element was like coming onto the market, and the first considerations about code requirements for that were being discussed. So I had no idea of building with timber. So how do you start planning even building, and why would you do that? I think is an important question for all of us to keep asking ourselves. And it's not so that we're not building with timber. I think that is something, you know, as architects and engineers, we often forget. We like this complex projects, but if we look into single family housing, for example, in the United States, 80% of these houses are built with timber. Now in Europe, for certain reasons, especially in the past with fires, big fires on city scales, that amount is very little, especially in like the more densely built areas like Germany. It's only 15%. But here in Africa, we have a lot of like housing, informal housing, and that consists for 50% of like our population. And those houses are often made of traditional materials, including also a lot of timber. Some of the misconceptions about timber are about like when we build with timber, we harm our forest. And there I want to point out this graphic here in the left bottom, because trees work the same as us, as people. When you are young, you need a lot of food, you have a lot of energy, and a tree is the same. A tree grows, it emits a lot of oxygen in its early growth phases, and when it's mature, when it's old, that like kind of slows down. It's just as when we get older, we don't have like that energy anymore as our children have. So young trees contribute a lot more to the oxygen, to our climate than older mature trees. So using trees in a way we also use our crops is also beneficial for our climate. And then Oriol also showed this diagram, but I think it's an important one because we have a lot of forests. We also have a lot of forests in Africa. And Oriol mentioned like plantation wood. Of course, there's a difference between plantation wood and primary forest. The primary forest we want to keep intact because it is important for our ecosystem. But even within that primary forest or within like grown forest, when it's done in a sustainable way, we can source a lot of material. And actually, when we source that material, not for firewood, but for construction wood, we create a lot more value. In Europe, for example, since the introduction of CLT, the forest coverage has grown by 10%. This is, of course, not only due to that we use now in Europe wood for construction, but like the additional value for the forest also contributes to a better protection of that same forest and a better protection of keeping that forest healthy, because we cannot source just one tree from that forest. When we do it well, we can source tree after tree after tree from that same forest. So our building material, wood, regrows, it keeps its value, and that value grows over time when the wood and the forest is well protected. And I think that is where also in Africa, a lot of people have to like start to understand that, you know, through this different value of the product, and we see that in the region where we're working in Tanzania, that the tree is worth a lot more when just used for firewood.
Leander, sorry,
yes.
I think the slides are not moving.
Oh, they're not moving?
We are watching one rise building, the first one, just one.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Then let me share again and hope it works. These things are overlapping. So I hope you can see them moving now or not.
Now we can see the world map. Yeah.
The world map. And this moves to the other one, right?
Good.
Now
Yes.
an eucalyptus plantation. Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. That I cannot see on my screen. So thank you for letting me know. So this is a slide showing the forest in Africa, where I just talked about. We see also like Nigeria has 23% of forest coverage, so that's right on the average in Africa. But that forest can be used when it's used as plantation. And this is an example from Tanzania. We have in Tanzania 52% coverage of forests in the country, and a lot of that forest is actually plantation wood, where we have mature trees 30 years old. Difference to Europe. Europe mature tree needs 60 to 80 years to come there. In Tanzania, that's only 30 years. So we grow our wood a lot faster. We have it available. Currently, it's driven into the paper mill or used for firewood because we have no construction demand just yet. A little bit we have as a supporting structure for our buildings, and this is Stone Town in Zanzibar. And we used it in the past also a lot in our traditional buildings, which are now part of the World Heritage here in Zanzibar, for windows, for balconies, for doors, and even for our construction of ceilings in the right image. So when we start thinking about timber, like as architects, we have to think not only about our building, we have to think about the whole value chain in relation to that. It's like, where do we grow our trees? What kind of trees are we growing? What kind of material do we get out of that? How do we work with that? I think also Marcus covered that. A lot of prefabrication, controlled environment for better quality on the construction side, and of course eventually the building, where we have to consider as much passive design measures as we can to keep the building simple, effective, and affordable. Now, how did we roll into that, and how did we get started by doing so? Actually, it was like this site, Fumba Town on Zanzibar, many years ago, actually 8 years ago, where there were two houses, because two houses were built. One conventional structure with concrete and masonry, and one house in timber. And we did that because nobody knew if people would be interested in timber houses. These houses were sold relatively well because you could step inside, and the one thing which really stood out for a lot of people was that the smell was different in a timber house. We are talking here a tropical context, and in a tropical context, you have like your concrete is a wet application. It doesn't dry out. It stays humid inside. You can smell the concrete in a new house, and you don't have that in timber. And that was the main argument at the beginning to actually build timber houses. Nowadays, we're planning this whole city where these houses are just a part of. And we started simple, stick built, timber frame, no engineered wood products just yet. Simple houses, 1 story high, a lot of prefabrication, because we needed to also train the people. We had no carpenters, no woodworkers in the region. So fishermen were like re-educated as carpenters, and in a factory setting, they created these first houses, which were done, brought from the factory, wall prefabricated on site. Now, from those houses, which of course were just a single story, we cannot build a whole city. It's not dense enough. So we started to think about two-story approach. Very flexible housing, also to a low price. These started at 50,000 USD for a 3-bedroom apartment at the beginning. And I think somebody would kindly need to mute because I have a lot of background noise here. So if everybody can see and mute themselves. But this house, we first started to use engineered timber. And that, of course, for the ceilings where it was most effective, because with cross-laminated timber, which as my previous speakers pointed out, is like cross-laminated, so it can span in 2 directions. And therefore, for the first time, we can create a slab with timber, which we never could with the one-directional system, which consists out of beams and columns and beams and, you know, like this more complicated ways of constructing ceilings in the past are done and made more simple by using CLT. And the interesting thing in this building, we then found out we still had to build like a conventional staircase, which is this hole here. And actually there where we're standing in conventional structure, we seen that timber is much more precise than the conventional structure. So the first building, we built the staircase first, and then the timber didn't fit. So we turned that around, we built the precise parts first, and then we built the conventional structure into the timber, so that we could make it fit to this very precise building material as timber is. Construction goes super fast. One floor is put up in a week, then another week to lay the ceiling, then another week for casting the concrete. And actually what slows down the building process is the curing of the concrete on top of that CLT slab. And then the top floor comes within 2 weeks with the whole building covered. And as you can see, these are like now built multiple times. The only difference is really this staircase, which we changed in sequence of constructing. The inside is very simple and a relatively open plan setting, which allows for 1 to 3 bedroom in there. One thing I want to point out, of course, in a tropical context, cross ventilation is very important. Overhangs to protect the wood at one side, but also to reduce the heat gain on the inside by creating permanent sun shading are very important design measures we have to add on to timber. Especially the protection of the timber from rain, which was mentioned, is also in a tropical context even more important than in a more temperate climate. So from there, we all got very excited about CLT. We started to build this building out of complete CLT. And that was a one of a kind. We will never do that again, although it was fantastic. This just comes as a Lego box onto sites. You put it together and you have your building. And actually the supervisors from Europe who were supervising the local team, they landed late on the airport, and the local team already started, and they couldn't believe their eyes, the supervisors from Europe, when they came there, how fast our local guys were with the application of the material, because it was not so different than the prefabricated elements we are using for the other projects. So again, looks great, also is great from the inside. Of course, we try to expose as much as we can. But then when we're looking at cost and resource effectiveness, we found that, you know, it's not necessary to use so much CLT. And this is the same, you also would not build a complete massive concrete house. You build a concrete house using masonry, using drywall. So also when you think about timber, we have to think about resource effectiveness and which system is like appropriate where. So from this first building, which you see on the left, and the orange is mass timber, we went to the second iteration of this building, which is currently under construction, where the orange is still the mass timber, but you see that it's far less because we combined it with a composite slab where we have a little bit of concrete and a little bit of CLT. We created some portions of the ground floor in conventional structure to lift our building a bit farther up to deal with water, with termites better than the other structures. And we used a lot of timber frame walls because they are more effective in terms of like the resources and also the cost in the end than the CLT is. Of course, what we kept is like the core of the project, the staircase, where also all the CLT is exposed. Now we were doing all these projects, and then our client said, like, but you know, nobody like really notices what we're doing. Can we not do something strange and awkward and really set a landmark for what we're doing? And that became like the project we kind of are known for at the moment, the Burj Zanzibar, which is like actually not so complicated when you think about it. It's a lot of like stories like stacked on top of each other. The complication lies into like convincing the authorities that you can do this in timber, where no engineer in a local context has ever worked with timber. So we are confident, and this project is going to site later this year or early next year, depending on how everything rolls out, but that we are going to pull this up, and that will be really a game changer, I think, also in the African context, because currently this would be the highest building in the whole world built in timber. Of course, that building is very much relying on the same elements, like a lot of modular approach, a lot of modular building elements to keep the cost in check, also to make sure that the logistics are well handled, so that not when one piece is missing, the whole project comes at a standstill. Because unfortunately, this wood still needs to come from Europe because we cannot get that same kind of quality wood from the African market. This also has to do a little bit with, of course, the advantage on one side that we can grow our wood faster, is a disadvantage on the other hand that the wood is less dense, and therefore the properties of like a African product of CLT are not exactly the same as a European product of CLT. And this is something, of course, in the context, especially when we're working with it, we always have to keep in the back of our minds so that we don't get mixed up with what is possible with which product. And then at the end, and Marcus already like talked shortly about this project, but I find it important to point this out, because the tower is great as a landmark project, but actually this project JJ is for us a lot more important because this is the first time we are really like achieving affordable, equitable housing in the local context. We are selling here units for $10,000 built in timber, and all the other projects have led to the possibility of making this possible. We looked also very carefully into the local context. So we don't want to make a project which is kind of not appealing to local people. So we took a lot of like design approaches from a local context in Zanzibar, where you do see a lot of 100-year-old actually timber constructions as part of their building, as part of like balconies, as part of like permanent sun shading, as part of like circulation as well. And that we looped into this housing project where we have a portico as like a social entrance to like smaller apartments. And all of that is built in timber. One additional architectural component to that is, of course, that we didn't want to make a very homogeneous building. We wanted to be as heterogeneous as possible. So a lot of different apartment types. We developed 64. That was too much for the developer. They reduced that back to 14. So we're building now this house with workshops in there from 10 square meters, going to studios, then going to apartments, 1 to 3 bedrooms. All of that in the same project. Yes. We're almost there, right? I'm almost done. So again, here also, we went then to the same iteration, optimizing the project, now not looking at resources, but at local availability, because this is the other important thing. We can look at resources and say, this is really reducing it, but do we get it on the local market? And I think that is where we have to work on, especially when we look at the value chain. I'll skip a couple of these slides. When we look at the value chain for timber, we need to start by the demand side. We will not bring up like an industry when there's no demand for the project and for the product. So we need to develop simple timber structures and then go to more complex system structures. When we start with the complex structures, we will need to import all that material and we will bypass local markets. And that was like the experience we made throughout our projects, and which I think is important for us all to understand when we start building with timber, when we start planning with timber as architects. And of course, in the end, it's not about the project, it's about like the community we're creating, which goes a lot farther than that. We have to like preserve our green space and we have to create our communities. Thank you. And this is how the town looks now, and this is how it will look tomorrow, hopefully. And those houses in the circle were these two houses where it all started with.
Thank you, Leander. This is very, very interesting and very, well, I wouldn't say challenging. It's just that it would challenge our creativity and professionalism. Now, I'll hand over to Architect Moradeke and Architect Biodun. Please, we have very little time, so I will ask you to please speak for just 1 minute each, because we still have a number of things to do so that we can close at 5 p.m. Thank you very much. Go and Biodun.
Thank you. I'm just going to highlight maybe about 8 or 10 points. So Leander Moons had mentioned that there's a lot of misconceptions with timber, saying that getting into mass timber construction systems may be harming our forest, but that it's not exactly true, because of the way trees grow themselves, and the fact that mass timber is considerate of the complete value chain, from afforestation to construction. He did mention that in his experience, it was possible to train people who are not even, who don't even have construction background in the use of this material, and that construction is fast, it is effective, it is resourcefully effective, and especially when you compare with building in concrete. And of course, he did emphasize as well that in the experience, using the hybrid system is better than going all CLT. He also did mention that the modularity of the system helps to eliminate cost. And it is also interesting that he said that the African timber that we have right now has not been found to be effective for the CLTs that they have been using. I think one of the other things that I also learned from him is that it is important to get the community buy-in when we're designing our projects. Thank you.
Maybe shortly to add one thing to that. So the African timber it's still very suitable, but it's different. So I think that is the main thing we learned through our projects, is that we cannot one-to-one exchange like the European product by the African product. I think that is a very important lesson for us all to understand, because we also weren't aware of that, and that was a great way also also by the cooperation with Marcus and his team to learn about what does it actually mean when we grow our trees faster, when we produce it slightly differently. What does that mean for like how we as architects then apply the material? And a lot of knowledge we learn on the web all comes from Europe, from Australia, from the US. So we have to be aware that our African product would be slightly different than that. And that, I think, is important, like knowledge we share on the African continent.
Thank you. John, we can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, thank you very much, Leander, for your presentation and to quickly grab that you are advocating for.
Can you speak louder, please?
Okay, am I better? Is it audible now? Can you hear me now, please? Okay, so
yes.
I got that you advocate for movement from trees to house. You spoke to us about prefabrication and precision, and that will save us quality time in project delivery. You said in the project, a floor in 1 week, and you spoke about different projects that you have handled, and which includes the building house, open and dental development. Spoke which interests me the most. That's a landmark in Zanzibar that has mixed multi-purpose development. Also, you spoke about the Chichi Living Unit, which is a 4-floor development and all made in timber. You also spoke about the fact that we can have a hybrid of timber and prefabricated concrete, you know, to reduce the weight of the construction of in projects. That fascinated me, the fact that most of these projects you are hands-on, and based on your experience, I hope that we'll be able to further this conversation after now. Thank you very much.